Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar for July. It is how to hire the world's top sales reps. So if you don't mind, we're very interactive with these webinars. So if you can put your name, your company, how long you've been in sales into the chat. We're going to be using the chat a ton throughout this morning. So put that into the chat box. Also, if you want to ask a specific question to one of our speakers, Brian or Kurt, you can use the Q&A button and ask a more specific question. So going to be very engaging, a lot of interaction. We'll have polls, and potentially at the end, we might be able to get a couple people on stage to talk with the group. So why you should stay on today's webinar is number one, you get to hear from Brian Burns. He's one of the OGs in the sales world. He runs a top 5 sales podcast called The Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling. You've probably seen him do his walk and talk videos on LinkedIn and YouTube. And he's going to answer questions on how to hire the best and how to retain your top salespeople. So ask him throughout this and take advantage of it. We also every month have a featured speaker, and we want you to learn from your peers. So today we have Kurt Tufert, who is the VP of Sales at DXP, and you're going to learn from him on a lot of best practices of how he hires and retains at his company and beyond. And then last but not least is we're going to have a giveaway at the very end if you stay till the very end of the webinar. And what we're going to do is actually give you 1 month of free access to Brevity Play, which is our phone-based role play platform. But you have to stay until the very end, that last 10 minutes, to get access to that. And for those who have not been on the webinars before, every month we have topics around where sales teams are getting stuck, where reps are struggling, like how to get better when deals are going sideways. So it's a lot of actionable ways to improve, learning from your peers and a lot of people that are famous in the sales world. So today we're going to go into 3 specific topics. Again, it's how to hire the world's best sales reps. And the first is going to be how do you nail the hire? So what are those top traits and interview questions to spot and hire A players? Number 2 is onboarding with speed. So how do you ramp people up faster in that first 90 to 120 days when you get those new sales hires? And then keep them being successful. Well, how do you help them be from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all mentality? And retaining your top talent is really hard these days. So that's going to be a big focus. But as I mentioned, it we want this to be very interactive. We want to get feedback from the group. So we're going to do a poll out of the gates here. And Brad, go ahead and get that poll up. What is the hardest part of hiring sales reps? A is going to be finding top talent. B, that ramp up the first 90 days. And C, continuous coaching and training. So we'll get some live interaction here and see how things are going. What is the hardest thing out there right now? Brad, is that poll live? All right. Brad, can you read off the results? I am, for some reason, not seeing them on the screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Finding top talent seems to be the top reason. Ramp up first 90 days, second, and then continuous coaching and training is last reason. I can end that here. Just a second. Should share the results.
There we go. Okay, cool. So finding top talent was the majority. Ramp up the first 90 days was second, and the continuous coaching and training. So we'll use that feedback throughout this to ask some questions and get people involved. All right, getting into some of the content is, well, Brian, first off, I wanted to get your perspective. I've talked too much already. We want to make sure we get you going. Do you have any overall thoughts on this topic or what you're seeing this year compared to the past with, finding the best people, retaining the best sales talent?
Well, I think it's when you see looking for attracting great talent, I think you have to know what great talent is. And on the sales leadership show, what I do is I ask that question to every guest. So over 1,000 sales leaders. What do you look for in a great salesperson? And the best sales leaders, like the best salespeople, have a written profile of what they're looking for before they talk to anybody, before they describe it to a recruiter, before they even start a search. Why do they do this? Because they tend to make hiring mistakes, and hiring mistakes are the most expensive, not because of the cost of the people, it's the opportunity cost. Meaning that if you look at your number one cost, it's opportunity. Meaning that if you take your top rep and if all the other reps were getting the same type of results as your top rep, that delta between the revenue you're doing now and what it could be is opportunity cost. So you need to have a profile so that you don't just go by instinct. And how many of us have made the hiring mistake of, oh, we hired someone we liked. They came into the interview and we just liked them. And what's the first question we ask when somebody is interviewing somebody, right? As soon as they're done, did you like them? But that doesn't really tell us how much talent they have. And I love that word talent because I think it's been overlooked and replaced by activity. Who's willing to do the most dumb things the fastest? That's the person we want to hire, the most cooperative instead of the most capable. And these sales leaders have really focused in on instinct, meaning who are they as a person? Are they more like an employee or an entrepreneur? And guess which one you want? Obedience is nice, but revenue is a whole lot better. And that's why we hire salespeople. And I'll get into some of the ingredients as well as we go through the webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. And the first topic that we're going to get into is what are those top traits of the A players and some of those ingredients that Brian mentioned. But I want to share a quick story before I put on some slides. Is I got lucky right out of school, and the first job that I had, I found a really good mentor that happened to be one of those A players. He was a wrestler in college. His name's Mike Heist, and the first company I was at, he climbed the ladder and he was one of those high flyers that knew the CEO and was constantly getting promoted and in the know of everything, and would get up at 5 a.m., was always at the top of the leaderboard, and I sort of rode his coattails at that company, and it paid off for me. So if I was going to try to get advice or mimic anything, I was trying to replicate what Mike was doing, and it helped me in the first decade of my career, and it actually came full circle later on when I changed industries and went to a more commission environment. Next thing you know, Mike was at that company and he was the number one rep 5 years in a row. So I got lucky out of the gates and found that person with the top talent. That's not always the case. And I'm grateful for that story. So I don't know if Mike's on today, but shout out to Mike Heist because he was that person that taught me a lot out of the gates. And Brian, I'm going to pull up now Price's Law and the Pareto principle. I know you talk about that a ton in the past, but not everyone might be familiar with both of those principles. And that's a great way to find and figure out where your talent's coming from. You want to explain that while I pull up the slides?
Sure. Well, I think we're all familiar with Pareto's principle where 80% of your revenue will be generated by 20% of your reps. And that's a good enough equation for a small team. But what if you have 100 reps? The equation still works, but then you have Price's law, which is highly focused. It's much more of a power curve versus a normal distribution curve. With Price's law, it's the square root of the number of reps. I know I lost most salespeople. Square root. All I know is commission rate, Brian. Simplify this for me. So essentially, what number times itself of the number of salespeople, that number will generate 50% of the revenue. A very small number is generating half your revenue. Why does this matter? Because the volume game doesn't work in sales. We keep wanting to believe it does because it's intuitive that it does. If you want to increase revenue, every volume has to go up. The problem is the return is not linear. It's marginal at best. And when I go into a large account with hundreds of salespeople, I immediately look for the results. Who are the Price's Law reps? Why? Because they figured out something that the rest have not. Most reps say it's the territory. Territory makes the rep, right? But does it really? In one account, one rep took the worst territory every year just to prove that that was false. That rep was interviewed on my podcast. You might want to hear that because that mindset and that skill set put together is enormous talent. And one of the key ingredients that they all had was this internal locus of control. Now, this was something that I learned interviewing great sales leaders because what's the opposite of an internal locus of control? It's external, meaning it's the victim mentality. And I'm sure we've heard this, especially this last couple weeks. What happened last quarter? Oh, they misled me. It got stuck in procurement. All they cared about was price. Everything but what they controlled was what was wrong. And the problem with sales, since it's so subjective, there's a little bit of truth with that, in all of that, but it doesn't help. It hurts. And then sales reps get into this downward spiral instead of an upward spiral. And I think this is the number one ingredient that you have to look for when you're hiring salespeople. But keep these two equations in mind because this is what's going to help you increase or decrease that opportunity cost and keep your team highly focused.
Thanks, Brian. And we're going to do another poll as we transition into the featured speaker, Kurt, here in a second. But Brad, if you can do the next poll about, do you feel you have a top performing sales team? Yes, no. I want to get a sense out there from the audience how things are looking. A lot of sales leaders out there. It's also important to note that sales is hard in 2025. It continues to get harder and harder. And
Well,
some of those traits you were talking about, Brian, are crucial. What about some of the stuff you hear, like competitiveness,
well,
patience, curiosity? What about that
yeah,
stuff?
I would look for that internal locus of control and do a lot of Google searching and learning about it because it's really the crux of everything else. Because a lot of people talk about will and skill, but you can have a lot of will, but if they don't believe that they are focused on the things that they control. And I think the next one is the performance mindset. And this, very few people understand that sales is not an activity. It is a performance art, meaning that it's how well you do it. It's not karaoke. We treat sales like it's karaoke, meaning that we have all the music and the accoutrement, but none of the skill. We can't sing, but we can read the script on the karaoke machine. It's not music, it's comedy. And in sales, we've replaced the performance with activity. We buy more and more tools to do more and more dumb things faster because we're in love with volume. And I love these polls. Do you know that I used to do a lot of these to kind of understand individual reps? Over 80% of salespeople believe they are the best salesperson they know. Now, can you think of a single other profession where that would be even comprehensible? If you asked 80% of the doctors, would you think 80% of the doctors would say, I'm the best doctor I know? No, they want to know better doctors. So we can get into the performance mindset and how to find these characteristics in the interview process later.
So true. And it looks like on that poll, about 75% of the people out there didn't think that they had a top performing sales team right now. So again, sales is hard, the industry is hard. It's hard to find the right people that we're talking about. So that's what we're going to dive into as well. And the performance mindset, I'm a huge proponent of that. We're going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of today. All right, transitioning over, let's get some questions in the chat too. I don't see as many questions right now. We want to make sure we get everything answered with Brian and Kurt. So if you have any questions that have came up so far, please put them in there and we'll try to showcase one to get it answered. But transitioning over to our featured speaker for this month, Fert Tufert. He is the VP of Sales at DXP, which is an industrial distribution company. I know a lot of the audience we typically get, usually 30 or 40% is from the industrial manufacturing space. So this is going to be fantastic for those out there to learn from Kurt as well as everyone else. He's out of Houston, Texas. He's also, in addition to his VP of sales job where he crushes it, he's an adjunct professor at the University of Houston teaching sales classes. And he's done a ton this week, which is phenomenal. And what he's going to go over today is just share a little bit more background about his perspective as a sales leader. I know they do a ton of assessments for selection, training, and coaching at DXP for his team, and sort of the why, how, and where he uses it at DXP. So, Kurt, now's your time to shine, man. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much, Justin, and welcome to the webinar. Thanks for everyone being on the call here. The purpose of my jumping in here is really to give everyone on the call a little bit of perspective as relates to tools that's out there. DXP is an industrial distributor. We have about 350 outside sales pros in North America, and they're in a technical space as well as a commoditized space. So it's very difficult and challenging to find that top talent. It's great when we see it at the competition and we're trying to recruit them over. But what we found here in this crazy world in 2025 is that we have to grow our own. It's very difficult to continue to poach from the competition because they're also trying to poach from their competition. So we have approached recruiting and developing sales pros using assessments, and we align ourselves with a company called the Brooks Group, in addition to some assessments that we get from another company, Assessments 24/7. The purpose of using these, to Brian's point, looking for that internal locus of control and looking for that talent, is that we create benchmarks as if we were, let's just say Dustin and I in brevity, we were going to create the ultimate basketball team. We would create a benchmark for the point guard, for the forward, for the center. We would look for standards and measurements, and that would be the ultimate. And it's the same in sales. We use a benchmark and we kind of approach it. If this job could talk, what would it say? What would it say to be an outside sales pro in an industrial space selling a technical product into a mature market? And we start looking for behaviors and characteristics. And then once we start interviewing people, we start interviewing toward a standard. Now, I know that if I'm looking for a professional basketball player and I'm looking for a point guard or a forward, and somebody rolls up and he's 5'2", but he's got a great personality and everybody likes him. Hey, that's great, but he doesn't fit the benchmark for a professional basketball player in the NBA at 5'2". He does not have a vertical leap of 4 feet. So we sometimes have to look subjectively or objectively using these assessments. So phase one is that we use that to help weed out and to weed in the right talent. Then we use it in the interview process to help our hiring sales managers ask the right open-ended questions, behavioral-based questions to draw the candidate out. And then the last part of that is what we saw in the survey. The second most popular answer outside of finding top talent is what do we do in the first 90 to 120 days? We use these assessments to help coach and develop using the insight and the discovery in the content of the assessment. How do we connect that dot? How do we isolate their strengths? How do we maximize that? How do we minimize their challenges? Because we know at the end of the day, I am seeking people who are focused on that customer's wants and needs. And then I can start developing that outside of the toolkit of giving them the right onboarding and a set of accounts or learning the CRM or understanding the secret decoder ring of each of our internal companies. What can I do to generate revenue? At the end of the day, just like what Brian said, is look, I don't want to repeat the same mistakes better. or faster. I want to remove that. I want to make that person productive as quickly as I can because at the end of the day, bottom line is revenue generation in a way that doesn't offend the customer. We've got to make sure that this person is a rock star, this person is a maverick, but they don't do it in a way that leaves bodies in their wake. Yes, they get the results that we're driving for, but do they get the results that they're driving for without getting a phone call from the customer saying, "Hey, that guy you sent in, I don't ever send him back here." We don't want that kind of an actor, if you will. We want somebody who can partner. We want somebody who can understand our core cultures and articulate that out there at the end of the day, still solving their problems in a professional manner, using some talent and using some sales training to reduce that learning curve. Now, that was a lot to be said there, Dustin, in a short amount of time, but that's kind of where we're at.
No, that's amazing. There's been a few questions that have come in the chat, and I want to get your perspective on it. And it actually transitions well to the next slide. One of the questions I think from Megan goes into, well, actually, let's do Jeff because he looks like he asked specifically on the assessment. He says, "What does a typical assessment look like? Is it very prescribed, objective, or more subjective, depending on the individual?" That's a good one for you, Kurt.
Jeff, that's a great question. I don't want to use the same sales answer that we all use as it depends. I want to say that we have aligned ourselves with the DISC profile and with the driving forces profile because we felt that was the most objective. It looks at behaviors, it looks at ways of taking that DISC profile and determining what are their strengths and what are their challenges. Now, with that being said, there is still some subjectivity when the reader of the assessment is trying to read into it. Oh, this guy may be a B plus player, but boy, he fills a need on my team, so I will overlook what the objective analysis says just so I could shoehorn that person into my company. We got to teach our sales managers trust the process, trust the assessment, and then don't overweight it. We ask our sales managers to give that assessment about a 42 to 49% weight factor. It's not the end all be all. We still want to look at their resume and we still want to do some background checking, but it sure is a great differentiator when we're looking at two or three different people.
Well
Now,
said. And then,
Megan, you
yeah,
talked about
Meg.
interview questions.
Yep.
Um, I know that Brian's going to talk about those. The beauty of using assessments and tools is that you can reverse engineer this and ask through the AI engines or through other places, based on this candidate, what are the top 5 open-ended questions you could ask them? Now, I could look at somebody that has a results orientation score of 90. Help me to understand, how do you generate results if you were to come to work with us in the first 120 days? It may be kind of a leading the witness question, but then from there, I'm drilling down into giving an example of where results mattered to you or how did you achieve that as a result, because the result index comes from the assessment. Um, Versatility, frequent change, consistency, persistency. These are objective measurements based on the DISC profile, and I can kind of tee off of that to determine how does that look. And I want to be smart enough that I'm not having this person rehearse the answer, giving me the answer I want to hear. Tragically, I've read enough DISC profiles that I know if I've got somebody with a high I profile, they're going to say anything they can just to make it funny and fun. But if I've got somebody with some of the other profiles, I know that's a genuine answer. It was very thought provoking, and I can use that as I can continue to hone down that objective analysis.
And yeah, we're going to get into a couple of those questions for interviews from Brian here in a second. One more question, Brian, going back to a couple slides ago. Someone asked, when you're looking at that internal locus of control, someone that's more of a transactional sale versus more of a relationship manager and then complex sale. When you were speaking to the internal locus of control and the performance mindset, do you think that applies to all those situations, or does it vary based off the type of sale they're doing?
Uh, if it's in sales, it applies. What ends up happening though is the first level of sales is really product focused, service focused, which is reactive, not proactive. It's the opposite of locus of control. And it's natural that we do that because we're following our instincts, not our prefrontal cortex. We can't be thinking full time every day. We're reacting. And if the sale is more service oriented, question and answer, catalog based, transactional, and it's inbound, service might be enough. But then the next level is competition because there's always other alternatives. They can do nothing. They can buy from the competition. They can delay it for 9 months. And I think we're going to get to the slide, and it's important to understand that all reps, even 20, 30 years, when they start a new job, they have to start this stage all over again because they're not comfortable with the product yet, the industry, the company knowledge, competitive knowledge, all has to be learned. And if you don't have an internal locus of control, what do? I wait for training. Well, that's an external locus of control. It's up to you to make it happen. So if I'm a sales leader, you want to make sure they have that internal locus of control. Otherwise, it's never going to be their fault. They're never going to learn. It's going to be someone else's responsibility to get them up to speed.
Good stuff. And we got close to 100 folks on the webinar right now. We appreciate everybody. Keep using the chat, asking questions. The next part we're going to get into is more around ramp up and the interview side of it. And one thing that you could put into the chat right now is, what is your number one question you love to ask when you're interviewing sales reps? I think that would help out the audience and probably get a lot of good ideas of what are the top questions to ask. And Kurt, I wanted to go back to you real fast because I know you said when we were talking the other day that you've been using AI quite a bit to help maybe with some of the interview process or questions. Could you speak to that real fast? And then Brian, want to get your top question or questions that you like to ask too. But go ahead, Kurt.
Wow, how do I speak to that real fast? Obviously, AI is an ever-changing evolution right now. I use AI in two different flavors. In using my company assessments 24/7, there's an AI engine that sits right there on the profile, so I can interact with the entire assessment using AI. Or I can take a PDF of a person's resume and I put it into an engine. Does the analysis on that person, and then I start asking open-ended questions based on what you've read. What are the top three questions I could ask? Where do you see the holes in their in their resume? Look at the companies they worked for. Do the research. Now compare and contrast. Do a SWOT analysis on the person. There's a lot of things you can throw out there, but it just allows you to work a bit smarter to hone down on the interview rather than what we used to do in the past, which is I know them, I like them, I trust them. Will they come to work for me? Well, I get it. People, buy from people they know, like, and trust. But that internal locus of control that Brian keeps talking about, that's got to be the motor. We here at DXP, we have this culture where we call it the motor. Does the person have a motor? A motor to learn by themselves, a motor to get it done, a motor to connect. If they don't have that, if they're sitting around waiting for me to come and train them, that's a long wait. And then we're back to the same thing again. And so AI helps me to flush out some of that and allow me to have a very quick understanding of that person. The last part of this, which this is crazy, is using Notebook, which is a Google product. I put their assessment into Google as a PDF and it turns it into a two-person podcast. So now I'm driving down the road about to interview Billy John, and I get a podcast on the assessment, two people talking about that. So now auditorily, I'm learning a little bit more about this person through the assessment and their resume. So by the time I actually meet Billy John, I feel like I know this person. So again, we who are in the hiring process, we who are in the interviewing process, we've got phenomenal smart tools out there to help us do the right thing quicker so we can bring the right person on board and then onboard them so they can generate revenue faster. And that was a long answer. Sorry, Dustin.
Oh, you're good. That's some good tips to use AI to our advantage and make us more effective and efficient. Thanks, bud. Brian, what is your number one question you like to ask in sales interviews? And I think we got a couple questions coming in while you're answering that.
I would start with the person, their instincts. I would look for something on their resume, their background, where they had to perform a sport, a hobby, a passion that they have. It doesn't have to be a sport. It could be cooking. It can be debating. It could be filming, whatever it is. And then I would ask something like, when you lost or when you failed, how did you take that? How did you fix that? And you can kind of get a sense of how they learned. How'd you become good at that? How do you view sales? What's your metaphor for sales? Is sales like dating, or is sales like a project? Is sales like a puzzle to you? Is sales a passion for you? And one of the best questions I learned interviewing great sales leaders is, which do you like or which bothers you most? Losing or the desire to win? What drives you? Are you trying to avoid losing or you have to win? If you don't get an emotional reaction, that person's even keeled, because part of the motor is caring. You have to care. There has to be a passion. It can be money, but not only money. They have to have a competitive sense, either competing against other people, competing internally, competing against themselves. If you don't get a sense of that, their personal development, because anybody who's has a performance background, they've had to take feedback. They're used to losing. They're used to coming back and training and knowing that it is not as easy as it looks on YouTube. That's what I'm trying to pull out. If you're trying to find out how good they are at selling, have them walk you through a deal, start to finish. A deal that they started, that they closed. Where did it go right? Where did it go wrong? What did you learn along the way? And if you learn something, how do you prevent it from happening again? The most common answer I get to what you learn is everyone says, I hate to lose. I go, you didn't know that before? And they go, well, I knew it before. And I go, you didn't learn it then, did you? You remembered it. And when next time you lose, it's going to feel just as bad until you learn how to prevent it. So during that interview process, I would take them to a place they're comfortable with and see what comes out. If they don't care about winning or losing, how are they going to be at sales? If they don't take feedback from their coach, yeah, I played football all the way through college. Why didn't you go pro? My coach didn't play me enough. External locus of control. Someone else's fault for my failure. Any of those things are instant, see you later.
Brian, you mentioned needing an emotional response. Do you find that if you ask the question, there's a higher likelihood of them being successful if their desire to win is higher than their desire not to lose? Or either way, as long as it's an emotional response, is that a good response?
That's all I care. Right.
Yeah.
You know, I've had this debate probably 1,000 times in the last 5 years with reps, and it's almost equal. Hating to lose, loving to win.
I think when I'm playing sports or competitions, I hate to lose more, but in sales, I love to win more. So it's interesting that you said that you put it that way. I never thought of that.
Right. Would you rather get a 5K deal, or are you so concentrated on that win? And if people don't care, that's a real red flag, because they're too comfortable losing. The last deal you lost, what'd you learn? If you hear, I hate to lose, they didn't learn anything. It should be, well, I talked to one person, they told me everything I wanted to hear, and the deal just went south when they tried to get money, and he ghosted me. Sound familiar? How many times has that happened in your career? Couple thousand, right? Everyone's got that. You know, the false champion. Did that person go with their intelligence or their instinct? You're hiring instinct. Because you can't, only they can change the instinct. We can't. We're not the military. The military can do it, but they have total control over the person. As a sales leader, you want to herd the energy, that desire, direct it, not educate it and nurture it and be their little rehab coach. And if you don't have that caring and either a desire to win or a complete hatred of losing, they don't care. I'm too comfortable with it.
Got a lot of good questions coming in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Jeff, Ronit, Heather, Josh. We've got a lot of people chiming in here. Some good questions that they're asking in their interviews. So definitely write those down or save them. And we're going to transition. We're getting a lot of questions and feedback. So we might go a little bit longer than the 45 minutes, probably go closer to an hour. So make sure to stay on, everybody. And the next transition that we're going to do is around ramp up specifically. I know that was the number 2 pain point at the beginning of the webinar with the poll. Ramping people up that first 90 to 120 days is not easy. You put so much effort in hiring them and finding the people that we're talking about, and then trying to get them ready to sell is crucial going into that first 6 months or so. So wanted to get perspective from some other people from our team. Kelvin, what's going on, buddy? I know you had some really good stories from the Brevity days the last year or so, and specifically with some of the AEs that we've hired. And I think even recently with Craig just joining the team, some different things that you've done to help ramp your team up faster. So good seeing you, bud. Share your perspective. Thanks, dude.
Yeah, let's talk about this. Yeah, like it all starts with great self-awareness. So when we go back in time to October 2024, we're one of the pioneers in, AI role play, being able to simulate a real human conversation to improve closing more deals, increasing pipeline, and shortening that ramp time. So we actually used our product to our advantage, but it started with great self-awareness. I would say in Q4, Q3 of 2024, our greatest threat to closing deals was actually losing to no decision. So what we ended up doing in our process is creating 3 role play conversation drills for the folks that were looking to apply to be an AE at Brevity. Think about one was the price to value trap. It started off with, hey, Kelvin, this is really expensive technology and an unproven new category. Why is this so expensive? And seeing how our team, seeing how the candidates would actually prevent and overcome these micro moments was a really big part of our interview process. So I love the assessments, but the way we've kind of taken the role play technology is using it as a tryout versus just an interview. So a lot of people can say they were at President's Club, but how do you actually respond in a high pressure, high stakes moment? So we had them practice the price to value trap. Sometimes you get vagueness in the procurement process. So seeing how those AE candidates were able to get specific names, titles, and dates when they're trying to understand the procurement process. And then lastly, the single threadedness trap. Kelvin, just work with me. When I'll get this across the finish line. You don't need to talk to anybody else. So what we did was start with areas where we had some struggles when we were selling the platform. And the best part about it, we think about internal locus of control. We didn't give them a time limit or a number of reps. Well, we gave them a time limit. They needed to score above an 80 on all 3 of those scenarios to even be considered. But what we also did was it was unlimited. So if you scoring an 80, 85 in a Brevity platform is insanely hard. So we wanted to test out the candidate's ability to keep trying, really to get a gauge on the intangibles. And as Brian said a little bit earlier, we're not getting paid on obedience, right? So Kelvin, I tried it once, I scored a 65 and I stopped out, right? So being able to just have that tenacity to just keep going and going. They're almost getting their onboarding process started because they're getting great awareness of some of the traps that we run into that cause no decision. So the question you may be asking is, well, how are they going to get that information to know how to sell your product? So what we ended up doing, we didn't spray and pray a lot of candidates. We leveraged a recruiter that we trusted. So then at that point, I was able to spend at least 20 minutes a week with each candidate where they had to come to me and ask very targeted questions on how you would overcome these situations. So it also gives a good opportunity to see how we work together as well as get feedback along the way. And then speaking to number two, what we did is we mapped out our entire sales process from initial qualification to close, created conversation scenarios with a specific trap that they needed to score above an 80 to get to that next major milestone. So we created almost a storyline. And before they were able to practice on live prospects, they needed to go through Brevity certification program for all the different conversation, challenges and traps, scoring a high score. And this really worked well. I would say shout out to Ben and Niall. Within the first 4 months, they were able to close 400K collectively in annual recurring revenue. And I think a big part of it was that exposure therapy and making sure that they were able to score very high scores. And that really built up their confidence, leading into ramping relatively quickly. But it all starts with understanding the profile, but also understanding what's causing your deals to shrink, stall, or die, and seeing how they can actually perform versus just interview. There's a big difference between interviewing and performance. I'll stop there and see if there's any questions that I can answer based on 1 and 2.
Let's see. Well, there's one question from Shane that's relevant to what you're talking about, Kelvin. There's a couple other good ones in there that we'll get to, but Shane asked, who has responsibility for a successful ramp up? Is it the salesperson or the company, particular in a remote setting? Basically saying he sees it all the time where reps are hired, they don't have a onboarding plan or little to no onboarding plan, and then they're fired within 6 months. Brian, Kurt, Kelvin, any perspective there?
Well, you just answered it. They're fired in 6 months. So company doesn't care. The rep better care. I mean, how many reps are out there waiting to be enabled? Good luck with that strategy. It's not nice, it's not fair, but that's the world. Whose responsibility? It's your responsibility. Whose responsibility is to make your number? It's yours. Whose responsibility to get the right territory? It's yours. You don't like your comp plan, negotiate it. Everybody says, easier said than done. Well, that's why the people who make the most money do it. Everyone's waiting to be discovered. Doesn't happen. Keep waiting. Internal locus of control.
Yeah, from my vantage point, it's an right. Like it's I want to make sure I'm building the process. I have that great self-awareness, but at the same time, I'm a big fan of the concept of salespreneurship, right? And we going back to just double click on the internal locus of control. So it's both responsibilities, but my dad always taught me you point the finger, it's 3-point right back at you. So at the end of the day, I definitely want that onus on the seller to make sure they're getting what they need. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So just making sure we're, leaning into who's selling the best at the organization and outside of the sales leader, really piggybacking on the reps that are absolutely crushing it is another good way.
Good stuff. Well, we got a couple more questions in there. We'll try to get to them. We got the last portion here. We went a little bit past. We're going to go another 15 minutes because we've had so many good questions and interaction. The last part is really around retaining that top talent and some of the things that Brian was speaking to earlier. While I'm transitioning there was another question that came up that I thought was very interesting. They were asking about, it was a startup, I believe, that had a new product to market, brand new disruptive technology, maybe not as many resources as a bigger company, but they were essentially asking around hiring someone for that environment, which is very entrepreneurial. They don't have a ton of support behind them. They have to probably prospect, close deals, do everything in between versus like a big company, right? I think a lot of times those startups will hire someone from a big company and then they come in and it doesn't always work out to plan, but they had the great resume, they had all that stuff on there. Brian, do you see that pretty often, or what do you recommend with like the startup versus big company environment?
It goes back. Do you have my slide? Can
Yep.
did you do?
Yep.
Can you bring that up? Because that's critical. Okay.
That one?
Yes. See, everybody starts at the bottom right-hand corner, product focused, and it goes back to transactional. And most reps stay here. And why do they stay here? Because they have the service mindset, reactive. I don't have any leads. I have nothing to do. I don't need to go and make leads. And then they eventually grow and become competitive right above the product. And there they focus on what's the competition? How do I beat the competition, including doing nothing? But what does it take to get there? And this is what we talk about with talent, because to get to here, the competition is usually 6 to 9 months because they have to get comfortable with the product, the industry, the company, all that business acumen, the classic sales enablement. So what if you could shrink this into 1 month or 2 months? And here's the real beauty is that almost nobody or very few get up to really champion focus. They deal with a champion, but it's really just a user buyer. And they don't know the difference between a user buyer and a champion. And they assume that champion knows how to get something done at the company. And the champion assumes they do too, but they don't. And this is what happens with no decision. It's not that they don't want the product or can't afford it or don't need it. It's they don't know how to get it done. Sales rep doesn't know how to get it done either. Talent, right? How do you build that talent? You have to do what Calvin said. You break down your sales process into tiny little elements so that people can practice it instead of thinking it's a monolithic tip or trick to get these deals done. And then the final level is business focused, where people can sell with or without a champion. Now, I've got people in my course that have had to do this. Who has to do this? Imagine selling an HR system, okay, with no inbound. New technology, disruptive, expensive. But you're selling into an even-keeled persona. Can you think of anybody who cares less about the business than HR? Who goes into HR, right? It's typically the admins through finance or the front desk. Nice people, not movers and shakers. You're not going to find champions in HR. You're going to find nice people. They'll talk to you, but they're not going to go to the CFO. They're not going to go to the CEO for funding. They want your product. You have to become the champion. Now, are you going to read that in a book? You're going to hear that in a webinar or a podcast? I can tell you how to do it, but you have to practice it. You have to build up not only the confidence, but the ability to speak with multiple executives about their business, not about the product, about their business. That's a talent. And all of these are really building blocks, and most reps never get beyond the competition stage. They think they are. Remember, 80% of salespeople are the best salespeople they know. And what is that instinct, that overconfidence? Most reps, instead of becoming better, they found the secret. They tell themselves they're already great. I'm already an A player, but I don't have the talent. That's the problem. And sales is so subjective. There's enough evidence out there that they are A players to themselves. They had a good year, big deal. And maybe a lot of it was for them, or maybe a lot of it was just timing. It was the territory. And this is what I've been working with on clients, because you can show them, you can give them the knowledge, but they will 100% of the time revert to their instincts. You know, how many years do you have to sell where you still believe in a false champion, where somebody says, I'm going to get this done, no problem, just send me a quote. And you never hear from them again. It's all preventable, but you have to build up that skill and that talent, and you have to want to do it, and you have to believe that you're not perfect. And it's kind of hard to accept sometimes. And that's why the performance mindset is so critical. You imagine a coach listening to a player say, I don't need to practice. You know, I took the summer off, but I know how to throw a football. Don't worry about me. I'm all set. So those other guys you got to worry about. The coach would get on the field, right? No one puts up with that in any other performance except for sales. Maybe it's because a lot of people don't know what it is, or they think it's this big blob, or there's some mystery to it, or it is just territory, timing, and talent. But how do you get that talent? You have to do it, not just know it.
Piggyback super quick. There's two examples that we use in a sports analogy. There's contract clauses that folks are using for representing the right behaviors of a performance mindset. One example is Kyler Murray, where there's a clause in his contract that if he doesn't review film 4 hours a week, there's millions of dollars at risk. And one that I most recently learned about was Zion Williamson for the Pelicans, where he had a weight loss. He had a weight loss clause where a certain amount of body fat percentage as well as weight needed to be under a certain amount by year 5 in his contract. So the performance mindset is real. And I saw someone earlier asked about how can you measure performance? You know, we talked a little bit about it, how we score based on an 80 for even the new reps to get for their certification program, but even post certification, we've seen teams here reward behavior. We have one example where if their reps score an 85 on a role play, the highest score gets a weekly spiff of a certain amount. We have some teams on the extreme end where there's some companies that are blessed with a lot of inbound. If they don't score, if there's there's a certain trap that the team is struggling with and they don't score, they get taken out of the inbound roulette. So there's some teams in the brevity ecosystem that are even getting really nuanced in how we think about rewards and consequences for certain performance-based behaviors.
And guess who the players don't need it in their contract? You think Tom Brady has that in his contract? You think Michael Jordan had that in his contract? It was just the opposite. You will let me have access to the field 24/7. That's the difference. They care.
No doubt. The other thing, we didn't get to touch on it too much, but what's plaguing sales right now, and I fall into this myself too, is this know-it-all mentality where you do well for a few years, you start feeling good about yourself, you're making good money, and then all of a sudden you don't do the same habits you did before. You don't put in the work the same way. You get a little more complacent, and there's a lot of factors that go into that. So a lot of salespeople tend to get in that know-it-all mentality. They've been doing it for 20 years. They don't need to learn something new or practice, but there's always someone out there that's achieved more than you or made more money or been more successful. So you have to have that constant getting after it and more of a learn it all mentality. And that's really what we're all about. But okay, so we had about 80 stay till the very end. So what we're going to give you guys is a 30 days or free month of Brevity Play access, which is our phone-based role play. You're going to get an email from the team and you'll be able to sign up to get the training and get access to it. So appreciate you guys staying on till the very end. We got about 5 minutes left to answer additional questions that we have not been able to get to. So add as many questions as you can in here, the last 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll try to pick a couple. Was there any that you guys saw that I missed while we were talking there that we wanted to get to? I'm looking at them right now. Let's see. Let's see. Let's try to get one for Kurt. Kurt, let's get you back on here. Henry said that interview qualification scorecards. Oh, he was making a statement. Sorry, he's not asking a question. Let's see. Kurt, anything you found the last like 10 minutes or so that you wanted to answer or shed your perspective on?
Well, the scorecards are a great way to move from subjectivity to objectivity, especially when you've got multiple people doing the interview. And sometimes when the stakes are as high as an A player in a market that there's a high investment, you want that. At DXP, we issue a truck, an expense card, and sometimes they're very remote. So before I go and spend all that money, and to Brian's point, is one of your most expensive investments is that Sales Pro, and if they're not the right one in 6 months, you'll know you've got to have that objectivity in everything you do because otherwise it's all of the hiring mistakes I made early in my career was they look like me, they talk like me, so I like them. They're going to be great. And I am the worst technical sales guy in the world. My disc score is a 100i. I'm that Labrador that tail wags everywhere I go. And that's just not going to cut it when you're talking to somebody about a technical product, especially an engineer. So stick with the objectivity, guys. That scorecard is killer.
And one thing too I wanted to bring up is we're talking so much about the reps, right? Being accountable, internal locus of control, growth mindset, and that's 100% true. But also the leaders and the managers. I mean, before you start pointing fingers everywhere else, I mean, you also need to look at yourself as a leader as well. Are you doing these things we're talking about? Are you giving that type of culture out there? And sometimes I think that the leaders are pointing fingers and not looking at themselves as well. Do you, Brian or Kurt, do you have any perspective on like from a leader standpoint? Should they have an internal locus of control, or what do you think on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the number one thing that came out of great sales leaders versus average was that the reps felt like the manager had their back. Not just trust, had their back, meaning that they protected them. They cared about them, not as a revenue source or solely as a revenue source, but as a person.
Great point.
And yeah,
Go,
if
Brian,
you treat
go.
them like a cog or a means of production, how they feel about the company and the manager. Are they going to be open and honest and look for feedback? Probably not.
For me, just a quick, I'm stealing Jocko Willink's line. It's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. And and my gosh, if I could do it all over again, I would tolerate a whole lot less. Because yeah, therein lies my challenge is those weaker salespeople. I make my own excuses, external locus of control. Well, there's nobody that's left in that territory, so I better have a dysfunctional person who's a C player than nobody at all. Well, that's as toxic as you can get. But I tolerated it because I made the excuse the only person left is the outgoing bartender, and they've got a great job, so I can't recruit them.
I can give one quick comment, internal locus of control. I can't go to a board meeting and say, oh, it's my rep's fault why we didn't hit our numbers, right? Like that's just not going to happen. So sales leaders have to have that internal locus of control more so, or their jobs will be at risk, period.
For sure. Be accountable as a leader. Make it about your team. I mean, it's not about you, it's about your team, and get out there with them too. Like get involved in some deals, maybe have a couple deals just solely for you that you're taking care of as a leader. I think that keeps you fresh. It keeps you in the trenches. People are going to respect you way more if you're doing that versus just, sitting behind your desk doing KPIs, CRM, that type of stuff. So get out there, see what motivates your team. That changes a lot. I think especially the last 5 years. Maybe someone was very money motivated. They want to be the number one every year in a row. Then something changed in their life, and maybe they want to be more leadership focused. I mean, that maybe you did it at one point, but it changes year to year. So, what really motivates them? Where do they want to go? All that type of thing, I think, is important. All right. So got to an hour, still had a lot of people stay till the very end. Let me see if there's any closing questions from the group. But we appreciate everyone for joining. As I mentioned, those folks that stayed till the very end, we're going to send you that special email where you get access to Brevity Play. Just to recap real fast, what we went over today is how to hire the world's top sales talent. And we got perspective from Brian, Kurt, and the rest of the team of the way to spot and find those people, the way to interview them the best way, and then ramp up and retain the top sales talent. So if we didn't get to your question or you had something else you wanted to ask, feel free to email us or shoot us a message on LinkedIn. Kurt, what is the best way for people to find you if they want to reach out?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. It's easy. The last name is Tufert. There's only one me out there. And then you guys have all my contact information. You guys can be more than happy. I'm a pay it forward kind of guy. So if you have questions on assessments or any of that, just let me know and I'd be more than happy to share my information with you.
Awesome. And the recording will be available. It'll be on YouTube. You'll get an email from us early next week. And we appreciate everyone. Have a good Q3. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.